And instead, they told me about their conversations. Nearly 80% of women told me they felt judged talking about cannabis. Think about that for a moment. That's almost 4 out of every 5 women. And if 4 out of every 5 women have felt judged, how many decided not to ask the question? How many decided not to tell their doctor, not to tell their family, or not to ask the questions at all? And not because they didn't want to ask, because they didn't feel safe. And why does that matter? Because judgment changes behavior. It changes what we ask, and it changes what we admit, and it changes what we leave unsaid. And when we stop people telling us the truth, our ability to help them changes too. I think we often think that stigma stops people taking cannabis, but what these responses suggest is that stigma may stop people talking about cannabis. And if women stop talking, they stop asking, they stop sharing, and they stop seeking support. And I think that what struck me wasn't that women had experienced judgment. It's just wondering how many women sit in a car outside a clinic and then they just drive home. As an industry, we often measure access to products, access to clinicians, access to legislation, but perhaps there's another kind of access we've overlooked: the ability to ask a question without fear. Judgment isn't just a feeling, it's a barrier to good care, good education, and good research. And most of the women who've responded so far are Australian, so I'm not standing here claiming that these findings represent every country. But I do wonder, if Australian women are telling us this, then how many people in this room recognise these same conversations in your own countries? One woman had written, "I was met with a lot of judgment and not many questions. It was clear that people had an opinion based on stigma, not experience." And when I read that, I started thinking back over the last 8 years. How many women had held something back because they weren't sure how I would respond? How many conversations did I walk away from thinking they'd gone really well, simply because they didn't feel safe enough to tell me otherwise? The second thing that really stood out to me was trust. One of the questions I asked women was, what makes a cannabis conversation feel trustworthy? And I found the answers fascinating. So you can see from these numbers that women aren't asking us to choose between science and lived experience. They're asking for both. They want evidence, they want honest information, they want balanced conversations, but they also want someone who's prepared to listen, someone who's curious, and someone who respects that women know their own bodies. I actually found that incredibly reassuring, because women are certainly not rejecting science, and they're not saying that evidence doesn't matter. They just don't want to choose. So bring me the research, bring me the evidence, but don't leave my lived experience outside the room, because I live in this body every day. And one woman wrote, "Honestly, just someone who talks to me like a person, no lectures and no weird sales pitch." And another said, "I'd want it to feel like a conversation, not a lecture. Someone who listens, doesn't judge, and is happy to answer questions honestly." And what I took away from that is that trust isn't built by information alone. It's built through the conversation itself. And it made me realise that for 8 years I'd worked incredibly hard to become a better educator, countless hours learning the science, keeping up with the research, trying to have the right answers, but I hadn't spent nearly enough time asking myself a different question. What does it actually feel like to have a conversation with me? People rarely remember every fact you shared with them. They remember whether they felt heard and respected, and whether they felt safe enough to be honest. And that changed the way I think about every conversation.